Hello, hey everyone. Thanks for coming along, and thank you, Mark. That was a really lovely intro. Really lovely. Usually, before going on stage, I feel a little bit nervous about how things are going to go. Personally, I actually feel quite nervous about how it's going to go when I finish, because I've got my beard taped up to a microphone. So when I come off stage, I'm a bit worried about who's going to yank it off. John's going to do it. One less bearded hipster, eh? So. Part one. It's a three-part story. Sorry, what's going on here? Here we go. I've messed my notes up already. Never mind. So sometimes I find myself thinking, I shouldn't be doing this. Now, we've all been prone to a little bit of procrastination, right? My friend Jessica Hish has this saying called procrastinating. This idea of actually kind of making side projects when you probably should be doing your kind of actual work, and I think I've kind of slipped into doing that somewhat. But, sometimes I'm sitting there at my desk and I'm thinking, man, I have some client work to do, and the deadline's on Wednesday, and I really need to do some work on the partnership stuff for the magazine so the next issue can come out on time, and I really need to do some work on my much overrunning Eight Faces book, and I was going to do those beer labels for my friend's brewery that he's starting to set up. And then I promised my daughter I'd make this little wooden cover for her sandpit before winter came, and so all these things. And I really shouldn't be doing this. What do I mean by this? What is the this? Well, for me, it's the perhaps ill-advised decision to embark on a career as a musician. The video there was directed by a friend of mine, so this is not the video, it's me making music. It's me tinkering about in my studio, my kind of studio that we have out in the garden back home. So for a number of years now, I've kind of always juggled multiple projects, multiple disciplines, multiple media. I've found that I kind of have a very, very short attention span, and I get really bored with long projects, and I get very tired if I'm working on one thing at any one time. So I've always liked to do lots of different things. And it's very liberating. At the same time, it's actually kind of stressful, because I'm kind of jumping between all these different roles all the time. But I like the variety. I guess you could say I'm a designer mainly, but also sort of trying to do music now, be a musician, and have the magazine. So I'm kind of editor and publisher, and then there's all kind of logistics things around that. I've done bits of print design and web design, illustration and stuff, and I like to do a bit of everything. I think the only kind of consistent role you could say that I've always kind of ended up doing is emailer. Unfortunately, I am a professional emailer, it seems, but I would like that to change very much. So why then would I add to the stress? Why would I add another role into the mix? Why would I choose to do something that I should probably really be doing in my free time? Why would I eat away at the little free time that I do have, that does exist? And why now? Why is it the idea that I should be doing something now? Why am I sitting there going, why should I be doing this? Well, I found myself at the end of, I guess about the end of last year, and I had been making some music, and I had befriended some folks in the industry, in the kind of underground techno industry, and they'd given me some very favorable words about the music. I was really chuffed, and it was kind of at the point where it was almost finished. This music was it was getting there, and it was getting to the point where I thought that maybe other people might enjoy it. I've been making music for a long time, and it was the first time in my life that I felt that it could be kind of at the stage where it wasn't totally embarrassing. Although you may disagree, of course. So let me just take you back a few years, give you a little bit of context about my relationship with music making. especially as if you know me or if you've seen me talk before, you know that I'm talk very much about design most of the time, and typography especially. So many moons ago, when I was a student, or just after I finished school and before I went to university, I took some time out and I worked at Virgin Megastore when they still existed. And that's me over on the left there. That's what I look like underneath this. But yeah, before I went to university, we worked there. Sorry, when I say we, it was me and some friends pictured here who we all just worked. We were just shop assistants, and we happened to. There were loads of musicians there. We all kind of happened to play in bands or make music or whatever. And we convinced our managers at the time that if we could make a CD ourselves, would they let us sell it on the shop floor? And they said that we could, which was really amazing. I think we technically outsold Prince the week of its release. I mean, only in that store, but hey, there you go. And so you can see here there's like some point of sale stuff that's got the CDs on. It was called 434 Records because that was like our store name in the chain of Virgin Megastores. Anyway, we sold some stuff, and I was responsible for designing the cover of the CD itself and the point of sale and the website. And that was kind of the really crucial thing. I was building this website with this thing called Homestead. Has anyone ever used or remember Homestead? Yeah? Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not the only old one here. This is cool. Right, so really horrible, messy, sort of WYSIWYG website builder from way back in the day. But it kind of got the job done. And doing so, building this website for our kind of sort of record label, really just kick-started my interest in the web. So that became a kind of really pivotal point for me. And then it was around the time as well, there were loads of kind of Flash things going on. There were these really cool sort of Flash sites being built by folks like Hi-Res and Juxt Interactive, and it was all grungy and stuff like that. So I kind of mimicked all of that style, and I started building websites for myself for my kind of fledgling and very embarrassing music project, complete with pixel fonts and all of that stuff, and everything moved, and it's all very silly. And every now and again I would self-release CDs of really terrible kind of out-of-tune vocals over dodgy like industrial rock that I'd rather not dwell on. But fast forward to around about 2013, and I started getting some analog synths, just some cheap analog synths, and playing around with stuff, and I really liked the tactile nature of hardware. And I think in the same way that vinyl is really, really popular at the moment because it's kind of that antidote to Spotify, and it's like, if you have all of the music available to you, then actually having that very tactile experience with music and getting some vinyl and actually experiencing the music and looking at the artwork and stuff, I feel that is an antidote to the fact that we are so digitally connected to music and to everything, in the same way that indie publishing is hugely popular at the moment, despite the fact that we live in an age where digital publishing has never been more of a thing. And I think it's people wanting to get that tactile nature, getting back in touch with stuff. So it was very similar for me with synths and kind of playing around and fiddling with knobs and doing all the very similar to all the cool stuff that Toby's doing. So by the end of 2016, I'd been starting to make some music with this gear, and it was kind of going fairly well. But as I said, the trouble was the music wasn't complete. It was nearly complete. And I was thinking, well, you know what? It's always at the stage where it's nearly complete. It's nearly done. I'm kind of working on this stuff. It's never quite finished. And I was chipping away at it evenings and weekends. And I don't know what happened exactly, but I just got to a point where I thought, this is just never going to happen unless I do something different in some way. So what happened was I decided that for a period, I think it was like a month or a month and a bit, I would spend every Wednesday and Thursday working just on music. And I would, instead of doing work that day, whatever that was, that I would do music instead. And I would treat it exactly as if it was a work project, and get in on time and do all this kind of stuff. But it would be music making, and music making would actually happen in the day. Now, I was aware before I did so of the kind of financial implications, so obviously there's no way that this is going to be as financially beneficial as doing client work and stuff like that, but I realized that it was kind of the only way that it was going to get done, rather than just kind of doing evenings and weekends and whatnot. And also, we have a toddler who, and at the time she was younger, and evenings and weekends, weren't as much of a free time anyway. So I made another decision, and that was if I'm going to release this music, then I should just actually get it out there properly and start an actual record label to do it. So I got some advice from some friends, and rather than sort of pursuing record deals and stuff like that, I effectively sort of turned our company into also being a record label as well. And the other really key thing was that I didn't want to just put it out with like a digital-only release and put stuff on Spotify and everything like that, because I knew that it would just disappear into the ether. That, nothing against anyone who releases it digitally, but there are a lot of people who do that, and I wanted to make something real, something physical that I could hold, much in the same way that I do with the magazines, just for me, just to feel that I had done something, to act as a signifier to me that I was kind of more serious about this music-making thing than I ever had been before. And I should state at this point that I really had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I feel like all good things come from a healthy degree of naivety, and the other things that I've dabbled with and enjoyed in the past and have ended up being successful to a degree have all sort of come from a very healthy degree of naivety. So I gradually learned about the process of creating a vinyl record, the mastering, the manufacture, the distribution, and the promotion to an extent. And it's a pretty fascinating process, actually. I don't know if anyone's familiar with how records are actually made. I know all records are mastered, and I went to the mastering studio and sat in on the session. But when you're actually mastering to vinyl as well, there's the actual lacquer is actually cut, and it's a really incredible experience. So here's some quick video I shot of just the stuff on the mastering engineer's desk. About this is that, so when you play a vinyl record, the needle sits in the grooves, and the music comes out interpreted, and it comes out with speakers. But when you're making a vinyl record, the opposite is true. The sound then goes into the. I mean, obviously it's way more complicated than what I'm saying, but it goes into the needle, and the needle then actually physically cuts a groove in the lacquer. And there's loads of really interesting stuff about this, like the fact that a louder sound physically takes up more space on the disc. So if you have a louder or a bassier track, you even have to consider whether that track might actually fit on one side, or you might need to change the running order so that one track has to go on the other side, which is actually exactly what happened to us because of the pure bassiness of the frequencies. So it was really interesting, and it was an extremely almost magical experience, kind of hearing your music that you'd been sort of sat alone doing and kind of hoping that somehow it might turn into something, physically turning into something, physically cutting a groove in some lacquer that would then go off to a factory to then be made eventually into vinyl records. And when it was made and it was printed and it was sent out and distributed and stuff like that, it was then a really fulfilling experience for me to see it in record shops, in real record shops. This is in Hardwax right here in Berlin. Sort of the mothership of underground techno, so it was a real honor to kind of see it in there. I don't think they've ever sold any copies, but it's in there, that's what matters. This is on Boomcat, which is like an online site that I really respect for underground music. Managed to get a digital-only release that I put out the week before just to kind of tease it, featured on Beatport, and a little thing over on the bottom left there on Accelerator, so just below Goldie as well, so I was kind of happy about that. And then once the record was out, it kind of, in a way, even, again, only really for myself, sort of had drawn a line in the sand about me being serious about doing music. And on from that came all these other things, like I was released a remix by this guy Kilowatt, and then I did some remixes and then some podcast mixes and stuff like that, and nothing particularly special, but it felt for me like, because I'd made this physical thing, that it was out there in the real world and had kind of shown me and hopefully others that I was kind of more serious about making music. Here's a clip from the remix that Kilowatt did for me. Yeah, the video for that, or the kind of video art, is this lady called Joelle Snaith, who does some really cool stuff with processing, as some of you might have guessed from looking at that. And I kind of commissioned that just as a way of, because you put tracks up on YouTube, I kind of hate it when people just put pack shots of, the album and stuff on YouTube, and I thought it'd be more interesting to have something visual to look at. Anyway, so I've spoken a lot about music, and you can see that this is very much what most people would consider to be, or define to be, a hobby. Something I do for enjoyment, something I do without any real hope of reaping any financial rewards from it, or certainly any kind of financial rewards that might match doing client design work. So it's very much a case of don't give up your day job. But the more I started to think about this ethos, this idea that passion projects can actually become accomplished by inserting them into what you might otherwise consider to be your work time, I realized that it's actually something I've been doing for quite a while in a number of ways, especially with the magazine. So let's discuss design for a minute. Apologies to the folks who were in my workshop yesterday, because a little bit of history here that they'll have already have seen. But just to give you a little bit of a backstory, when I started out professionally after graduating from university, I went to work in the music industry as a junior web designer for EMI Records when they still existed, and was responsible for lots of hideous flash sites with pixel fonts and sliders with inertia and auto-playing music, and it was all pretty horrible. But I did a few of these and then gradually moved towards web standards and worked for Carsonified, and gradually went freelance and sort of got into typography and branding, like doing some branding for Brooklyn Beta when they first launched, and then responsive web design and all that kind of stuff, and then a few more bits of branding there. And I did the last version of Smashing Magazine before taking a break for a while from some client work. And as well as this web design and kind of branding stuff that I was doing, I started doing little bits of illustration. I'd always kind of dabbled in illustration. So this is, if anyone knows Andy Clark's book, Hardboiled CSS, I did the kind of internal spreads in there. And I was also doing little bits of print design, again, really, really small stuff, just for friends, bands and stuff, little CDs and booklets and things like that. And I'd done, posters and flyers and pretty small scale things, and I wanted to be able to do something much larger than that, and to something that would be, again, real and sit on your shelf and contrast the very ephemeral nature of the web that I was working in kind of day to day. So I started this magazine about typography called 8 Faces, and again, totally purely just scratching my own itch. It's something that I wanted to put out there more for just my own experience and pleasure, really, rather than hoping it would really do anything, but purely kind of by chance. I asked a bunch of people, including people like Eric Spiekerman and Jason Santamaria and Jessica Hirsch and stuff, to see if they would be interested in being interviewed by me for this magazine. They all said yes, I had to do it, and then I released it, and I think it sold out in like a couple of hours or something like that, and so suddenly this demand was there that I didn't kind of anticipate, so I realized, I've actually got to do this thing now, like it's actually a project. So over the course of 4 years, I built up a kind of a small team, and we shipped 8 issues of 8 Faces. And weirdly, partly by accident, I found myself doing way more than just being a designer, which, up to that point I would have purely described myself as a designer. And it was way more even than just being kind of an editor, because I guess you think, you run a magazine, you're an editor. But actually there are all these other things that go on behind the scenes, especially when you're kind of trying to do most of it yourself, where you're liaising with clients with people like fulfillment companies and shops and partners, advertising partners, stuff like that. And so there were all these different roles that I started to find myself doing within the course of running the magazine. This is kind of what the magazine looked like. I did the layouts for the interior bit, apart from the actual sort of favorite typeface spreads, which were designed by a German designer actually called Stefan Weyer in Cologne. And anyway, all of these roles involved in making a magazine continue till today. When 8 Faces finished, Sam, my wife, and I had started to work together on it, and we wanted to make our own magazine that was kind of more of an equal split, 50-50, her doing sort of editorial writing stuff, me doing more of the creative stuff and some of the business things. And so we wanted to appeal to a broad audience as well, so we created this lifestyle magazine, Largon, which, as Mark said, looks like this. We just released our latest issue, which looks like that. You can see it there as well. And Mark, did you say I can give these away? Yeah? Okay, cool. Right, so, I don't know, we'll have to think of a novel competition or something. Maybe Johnny can think of a competition question. Okay. So, I started to wear all these different hats as the founder of 8 Faces. And then while I was doing the magazine, as we were building it up, I also started working for Typekit as their creative director, and I was there for 3 years. And so during that time, I was kind of creative director of that, and I was learning about sort of how to manage a team and how to relate a company's larger goals to kind of design goals, and sort of continue this work of sort of editor and logistics manager and all this kind of stuff, and going between all these different roles. And I found that, to my surprise, I actually really quite enjoyed doing all this stuff that was not in any way really about being a designer anymore. I mean, sure, I was a designer and I designed the magazine, but to be honest with you, like design and layout and typesetting and everything is kind of a very small part of the process and happens right at the end. So yeah, that's a little bit what it looks like. But these are some of the roles that I started finding myself doing. So I was, initially I was a web designer, then I was doing bits of illustration, and then I was kind of a print designer and got a little bit more serious about that. And then an editor and doing all the stuff to do with the magazine, like operations manager and kind of advertising manager and all these, obviously not explicit roles, but I guess you probably would have roles like this if it was a larger organization. I was kind of doing some creative direction stuff, and I started taking more and more photos myself as well. I don't consider myself a professional photographer by any means, but it was something that I knew I could sort of do to a degree, and it was just kind of fun to be able to travel and do that stuff. So a couple of years ago, I went to Oslo in Norway, and I shot a hotel there called The Thief, a really cool sort of design hotel right on the waterfront. And I was taking some photos there, and I was interviewing the manager of the hotel about how it all came about and everything, and taking pictures of the staff and the rooms and whatnot. And then as I was sitting there afterwards, having finished everything, I was sitting by the waterfront. It was a real like sort of whirlwind trip, kind of in and out of Oslo in a few hours kind of thing. And I was just thinking, oh, this is kind of weird, because I'm here like professionally, and I'm writing an article and I'm taking photos. And that's like my job. My job right now is to take photos and to write an article. And there's, of course, nothing particularly profound about that at all. But what struck me is that both activities were so far removed from what I considered myself to be, which was, a designer. It kind of really made me question, what am I? What do I do? And so in that particular moment, I was a writer and I was a photographer for whatever reason. And then it kind of hit me that it was at that moment I realized that following my passions had effectively allowed me to do kind of whatever I wanted to do in a way, under this kind of increasingly flexible banner of work. And all of these little trips and everything are, of course, like tax-deductible business expenses, which is wonderful. And that also includes like tasting beer with like the founders of Beavertown beer. I don't know how well-traveled Beavertown are, but they're a very popular craft beer brewery in London. The main guy is actually Robert Plant's son, so they kind of got a bit of rock and roll history going on there. But yeah, just kind of writing about beer and photographing beer and kind of meeting these people became work, which was a really interesting concept to me. And eventually, the other day, I decided to kind of collate some photos together and just launch a photography portfolio, so that, not to kind of try and change careers to become a photographer, but just like, I enjoy doing photography, and I thought that it would be quite fun to offer that as a service to clients. I mean, I do currently, but kind of quietly, and I thought that maybe next year I might try and do a little bit more photography, just to kind of, just do a few more varied things again. So what is work? Most of the time your job, i.e. the thing that you do when people say, "Oh, so what do you do?" is probably the thing that takes up most of your daytime activities, or the thing that earns you most of your money. And I'd say that 99.9% of the time, they're probably exactly the same thing. Now, as you've heard so far, I believe that daytime activities don't necessarily have to be the thing that make up work in the traditional sense, or even be the thing that earns you most of your income. I believe that an important part of achieving this goal is letting other people know what it is that you do. So in doing so, you're reaffirming it to yourself, and then a really fundamental shift can happen. So I'm sure lots of you will know the photographer Dan Rubin. He's a close friend of mine. He's a Log-On contributor. He's a huge Instagram following, and he's been taking photos for a very, very long time. But his main role, his main gig, is kind of as a user experience designer, and he's a frequent speaker on the conference circuit and stuff like that. But Dan wanted to experiment. We were talking about this a few years ago, and in order to kind of shift his work and reputation towards photography, he changed his bio on his social media profiles. So up to that point, it said designer/photographer, and he swapped it round to read photographer/designer. And you can guess what happened, can't you? Now, Dan and I chatted about this, and I know that user experience/UI work is still a lot of what he does, and I think makes up a lot of his income. But a little bit like me with the music, like he's doing photography more because he loves it, really, rather than trying to make money. But he is primarily now known as a photographer, and I'm sure, and I haven't actually asked him this, but I'm sure that the vast majority of his photography clients would have absolutely no idea that really Dan is, his real job is kind of a UX designer. But of course, I hope you're now agreeing with me that there is no such thing as a real job. Which brings me to part 3. So part of the motivation of this talk is that people ask me, "Oh, so like, how do you do all this like different stuff?" And I usually laugh and say something, "Oh, well, I don't sleep much, ha ha ha." But then actually, and I think about it, I tend to sleep pretty well now that our daughter's kind of growing up a little bit. And not only that, but actually, when I think about it, I believe that pulling all-nighters on a regular basis really is not a good thing at all. There's a quote here from Jason Fried, the founder of Basecamp, who says, I think this is in an Inc.com article. He says, "Sustained exhaustion is not a rite of passage, it is a mark of stupidity, literally. Scientists have suggested that scores on IQ tests decline on each successive day you sleep less than you naturally would. It doesn't take long before the difference is telling. People pulling 60 nowadays on a regular basis are exhausted. They're just too tired to notice that their work has suffered because of it." And he goes on in the article to talk about he hears the argument that people say, "Oh, when you're just getting started, it's important to like work late and get all the stuff done." And then he says, "Well, it's nonsense, because what happens is, we're creatures of habit, and once you start doing that, that becomes the norm, and then you're forced into continuing that essentially unhealthy behavior. And you can condition yourself to thinking that that's the only way to operate, which I think is not sensible." So I feel the same. I don't feel that we can just cram our extracurricular activities into evenings and weekends. We need to find a way to make them sustainable. So in asking that question, what is work, we also have to address this so-called work-life balance. So the magazine that we run, Log-On is a Swedish word. It has no direct English translation, but loosely is around the idea of having not too little, not too much of something. And there's a kind of theme of a balance that goes through every issue. And it's about way more than just sort of clocking off at 5 p.m. and having a nice evening. I mean, it might even look on the face of it that Sam and I actually don't have a particularly kind of Log-On lifestyle, because we're frequently working and emailing and stuff into the evening. But in doing so, we're able to adjust our leisure time accordingly. So I'll skip through this quickly, but my sort of average day, not there really is one, but roughly kind of looks like this. I get up around 7, have a breakfast with my daughter, and I walk the dog in the fields behind our house, make a kind of fairly leisurely coffee, and then go to the office about 9-ish, stop for about 12:30 at lunch, have a fairly long lunch time, with my family, take the dog out for a long walk again. And then I stop at about 5 p.m. and then I have dinner with the family and kind of start getting Thea ready for bed and read stories. And then about 8 p.m. I usually then start working again, usually on just some admin-y tasks, just to keep magazine stuff moving along. Then we usually chill out, 9 p.m.'s kind of just have some chill out Netflix time. And then usually head to bed about 10:30 or 11, and then on occasion go out to the office and get more work done if necessary. So I think every now and again a late nighter is a necessary evil. I think it's just that idea of doing them all the time or believing that you have to do them to make your product successful is damaging. So in short, I think there are kind of two key parts of my mindset that have changed in recent years, or perhaps even in recent months. The first one is that nothing will succeed if you don't give it the time it deserves. So you have to find a way, somehow, of making that time. Secondly is that the line between work and play continues to blur, so just embrace that chaos. Let it happen. One other aspect of the whole work-play blurring thing that I'd like to discuss is that blurring of the line between what is a product that you make and what is a project, like a client project. And for years, I've worked exclusively on client projects, then I started making my own products. And recently, I've started to blur that line by getting involved with a company called Colonna, who are a coffee company. They're run by Maxwell Colonna Dashwood, who's like the 3-time UK barista champion. Very, very passionate people about coffee, and super, super geeky. It's fantastic. But in return for a reduced day rate, I took equity in the company when they kind of started the roastery. And becoming physically invested in this company, to my surprise, did really make me feel kind of much more kind of mentally invested, like it actually became, my own product, even though I, wasn't physically packing the bags or roasting the beans. And it was a really nice feeling. And so I'm now heavily involved with them as kind of like their sort of part-time creative director. I do all the packaging design, oversee all the website stuff, and do all the product photography and stuff like that. It's a thing we shot recently for Wired magazine for some of the feature on the capsules. And then it's really nice to see photos like this. And similarly with the magazine, with it landing on people's doorsteps around the world, seeing people in coffee shops like getting the bags and really enjoying the fact that they're having this coffee and kind of posting about it on Instagram. Actually, Colonna, we're stocked right now in the new refinery specialty coffee shop here in Berlin. So go and check that out if you're interested. So let's come back to this phrase, this idea of sitting down at the desk thinking, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be procrastinating, I should be doing paid work, I should be doing the sensible stuff, I should be doing what I'm meant to be doing. So what is this? For me, certainly recently, it's been me, saying I'm going to do some music instead of doing, work. Maybe it's just trying to make a living, creating a product that you've wanted to do for a long time. Maybe it's launching a portfolio site that you've been promising to do for ages and just finding that evenings and weekends just aren't quite cutting it. The point is that it really is, it's not fair if we start to treat, if we relegate our passions to the evenings and weekends, if we put them as like second-class citizens, they're never going to come into existence. So hobbies, they shouldn't be second-class citizens. Doing what you love should not be reserved for evenings and weekends. Of course, we have to be practical. So for a long time, I've done talks when they weren't sort of technical or typography-focused talks about, yeah, you should go freelance, everyone should go freelance, it's brilliant, all this kind of thing. I'm a little less gung-ho about it these days, I think. It's not necessarily for everyone. But I do still, I believe that, you should follow your passions, that you should do what you love. But, let's be realistic about it. So, with a mortgage to pay and a family to feed, I can't switch my daily output to music suddenly and neglect design. That 9 pence royalty check I got from Spotify the other day isn't going to go too far. But I really can't express to you the level of contentment I feel from having a real physical product out in the world, and especially something that's, it's great having a physical product like the magazine, but with something like music, which I'd always considered to be a side project, always something that was never really like proper or never really real, to actually kind of have that out there as a real thing with grooves that people could play. That was just a really incredible feeling, and there's nothing quite like shipping a physical product, as hard as it can be. But also, yeah, just taking the leap with the magazine as well. Is now really a sensible time to launch a printed, expensive to produce lifestyle magazine in a hugely saturated digital-first market? Absolutely not. But doing so is allowing me to do what I love on a day-to-day basis with the people that I love, and tell the stories of people who are fascinating, who I think are being genuine. And certainly with the magazine, we're not like a lot of other lifestyle magazines trying to sell an unattainable lifestyle. It's about celebrating real people doing genuinely good stuff with our feet firmly on the ground. So we also have to think, really, really think, how do we measure success? Not others' success, but our own personalized internal sense of success. So are you going to go and sleep well tonight knowing that you've made loads of money that day? Maybe. That's okay, I guess. But perhaps you'd sleep better knowing that you lost yourself in the moment of doing something that you absolutely love, that you've been wanting to do for ages, and finally you got the chance and you did it, and there was a good result at the end of it. I think if you project yourself into the future and you're lying on your deathbed and you're looking over your life and your regrets and your achievements, you're not going to be lying there thinking, well, at least I made loads of money. Okay, making some money and providing for your family is a really noble way of spending your time, but doing what you really want to do, making sure that your work hours are spent being happy, I think is much more valuable. And it leads, we as humans, we have this kind of intrinsic need for personal fulfillment, and money is really only going to get us so far. So at so many conference talks, you see Maslow's hierarchy of needs, very, very sort of cliche to show this. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But generally speaking, in our society, we're very lucky, very privileged position. Are we missing an opportunity if we don't strive to hit that top level of kind of self-actualization, that highest sense of fulfillment? In the first issue of 8 Faces, Ian Coyle, who's a really fantastic designer, he's not very well known, which is crazy because he's responsible for inventing the parallax effect on the internet and stuff like that. He's a super talented guy, amazing designer, amazing developer, and he and I spoke on a panel in South by Southwest years and years and years ago, and he kind of almost helped me invent 8 Faces, and that he was saying that he only has 8 fonts in his machine, he will only ever use 8 typefaces to get the work done, and this kind of all came from that. So Ian was one of the interviewees in the very first issue, and there's a quote that I've used before in other talks, but I really like it, so I'm going to use it again. Ian says, "Typically we judge success on impression-based metrics, but I look more towards expression-based metrics. How much do people actually care about it?" There's also a quote that's paraphrased because I didn't write it down quick enough, but I was at Brooklyn Beta a few years ago, and John Maeder said something along the lines of, "Make lots of money because the things you love to do won't pay very much." And I think that's definitely important to remember, especially while I'm saying all this stuff, hey, don't work on Wednesdays and Thursdays, do your passion projects instead. Obviously, it makes sense to set yourself up with a financial buffer. Maybe that's kind of doing a well-paying job for a bit and then quitting and doing something, or planning your week so that you make sure you are getting some of your actual kind of client work time in, stuff like that. Obviously, we need to be sensible about it, but ultimately, probably the things we really love doing aren't going to pay much money, so let's just work out a way of being able to do them without kind of needing them to make money. I think that's the real message there. There is a talk that a lady called Elle Luna does that I think was originally a Medium article, and then she turned it into a book, and she does a talk around it called The Crossroads of Need and Must. Sorry, of should and must. And the basic idea about it, this little URL down there is to the Medium article, I think. But the basic idea is that we go through life saying, oh, what should we do? What is the sensible thing? What do our parents want? Do our co-workers tell us that we should be doing with our lives and with our time? And then there's that feeling of what must you do? What do you feel deep in your gut, you personally, your own sense of fulfillment, that you feel you absolutely must do to feel content? And these crossroads of should and must, this idea of thinking, well, what is it that I want to do and how can I do it? That's what I find really, really interesting, and I guess it's kind of the same message as this talk. She says, if you feel a knot in your stomach because you see the enormous distance between your dreams and your daily reality, do one thing to tighten your grip on what you want today. So in the interest of being useful for you guys, I'm going to give you some key takeaways. It's a British joke. So firstly, decide on what your project should be and define it in exactly the same way that you would treat your actual work. So what's that? Deliverables, deadlines, dependencies, things like that. And know why you're doing it. So if I don't actually sell any copies of my EP, that's okay. That's not the reason I'm doing it. I've been very selfish. I'm doing it because I want to put something out there. I'm okay with that. 2, apply the above within reason. So you're not going to pay the mortgage by going all in. Don't quit your day job. Whereas once, as I said, I might have been a bit more gung-ho and said, hey, let's just do it. It's going to be great, man. I'm a little bit older now, a little bit more realistic, a little bit more cynical. And again, maybe work on some sort of financial safety net first. I managed to save some money by working at Adobe that allowed us to take a little bit more of a risk in doing the magazine and doing music and stuff. I mean, not much, but just something where it wouldn't be a huge worry. So that's something to consider as a possibility. And also just do it. Why now? Why do it right now? Well, that's a very good question. But as I said, I kind of found that I was doing all these things on the side, and that it's just, with music, I was just never quite attaining that thing that I wanted to do, is never finding a way of actually making it more of a thing. So staying safe, earning more money, never taking risks, that's sensible, and that will always be sensible. So don't wait for the right time to come, because it is not ever going to come. It is always going to be sensible to do the sensible stuff. It's never going to be the right time for you to say, okay, let's pack it all in and let's just do the fun stuff. You've got to plan to do the stuff you really want to do and make those allowances to enable yourself to actually be able to do that. Again, you don't want to be on your deathbed kind of with your head full of regrets about how you never quite managed to do the thing that you really wanted to do. And that's why doing it right now is the absolute best time. Now is always going to be the wrong time, which means there is never going to be a better time. I hope that has proved in some way useful. I'd also like to say that I don't think that my way of doing things is necessarily the best way at all, but a few of these things have worked for me. And by and large, although I still get extremely stressed, I get to spend my days pretty much doing the things that I really love doing. So thank you very much for listening. Cheers. Cheers, man.